missing piece of the equation, which is changing a little bit. You have some conservatives who are for capping or reducing the Pentagon budget because they finally accepted the fact that the Pentagon is this huge governmental agency that's just sucking up money for no apparent purpose. But a lot of people don't see it that way. They just see it as every dollar that we throw to the Pentagon is helping the troops. I think, of course, there's the jobs issue that.
Well, I got to stop on that one. We have to be a little less naive. I mean, we can't say every dollar is helping the troops, because even if that's your goal, is to help the troops, you can't be so naive to know that people aren't going to commit fraud and that you still have to run it as a business. I mean, when it's 40% of your budget and we have people here we have major issues, you have to take it pretty seriously. But anyways, keep going.
Oh, yeah. So the contractors tend to spread the jobs as widely as they can so that members of Congress feel like they can't vote against their systems, even if the systems don't make sense, because they don't want to be accused of undercutting jobs in their state or district. Likewise with military bases. Even the Pentagon admits they probably have 25% more military bases than they could possibly use for any purpose. But Congress won't let them close them because they're employers in important parts of the country. So I think if you're tied into it economically, you're less likely to look at the wasteful aspects because you're afraid, any criticism of the Pentagon could eventually bleed back into undercutting the parts of Pentagon money that comes to your company or your military base or your state. So I think there's this kind of look the other way aspect that has something to do with that. And I think there's some discouragement. People feel like, oh yeah, government wastes money, but what are you going to do? Pentagon wastes money. Every other agency wastes money. We're never going to solve it. And I'm just going to get on with my life. So kind of an apathy or just discouraged aspect that keeps
it's overwhelming.
Yeah. Just the amounts of money are very hard to process.
Well, I could just take a little tiny piece of that and be happy. I think that's how people think, right? They just want a piece of that pie and no one's looking anyways. So why not?
Yeah, I'm surprised that there isn't more. I think it's growing. Concern about all the waste and bureaucracy and overpaying and so forth. But I think for some people, it's, they're just afraid, as I said, that if the Pentagon becomes delegitimized in some way and can't be trusted with our money, then some of the things that pay for local jobs will get caught in that process as well and get cut back. And some of them should be, if you strictly go by what we need to defend ourselves and not view the Pentagon as a jobs program.
Well, exactly. And that's kind of what it is in a lot of ways, is to just keep jobs going. And when people legitimately want to cut back on the Pentagon budget, and not just the Pentagon, but the industrial complex budget, what is keeping them from doing that?
Well, there's a lot of campaign contributions to these members, many of whom are already inclined towards the industry because of the jobs in their district. The industry has 1,000 lobbyists, which is, almost 2 for every member of Congress. They hire people from important positions. The head of acquisition at the Pentagon went to work for Lockheed Martin after he had just approved a big contract for them. And so, it's quite likely when he was negotiating the contract, he was giving them a pretty good deal because he knew he was about to go work for them. And that happens, many of the generals and admirals go to lobby for companies. They don't keep good statistics anymore, but it used to be about 2,000 a year, people coming from either the military or the Pentagon and going to work as executives or lobbyists.
The revolving door.
Yeah, exactly. And so that gives them special leverage because they know the people that they're trying to, get the money from.
So the executives sit in a board meeting and they strategically figure out who we want to get into the Pentagon, how we can keep this revolving door going.
Yes, and it goes both ways because you got people coming out to work for industry, but also people from industry going to government. So when George W. Bush came in, Lockheed Martin sent about 12 people into positions like, Deputy National Security Advisor and State Department person for Latin America and head of military satellite procurement in the Air Force and the guy who helped run the nuclear warhead complex at Department of Energy. So if they had any problems with any of those agencies, they had a person that they knew very well who used to work for them that they could work it out with.
You wouldn't be so upset about all this stuff if it wasn't that we were killing people with it and that we were breaking laws overseas and here nationally, and that money is the driver of so much of this. When you look at your national security, it's hard to swallow the fact that money is what's driving so much of this.
Yeah, it's almost like a parallel universe. There's the universe where it's sort of believed that we need all this for defense. And there's the universe where you actually follow the money and you see how much of it is for lobbying, how much of it goes into waste, how much of it forces us to buy weapons that are really not relevant. Because once the system gets going and it's got political momentum, even if they decide, oh, actually, we don't need this thing, it's very hard to stop it.
Well, and there's a culture, too, where if you start, criticizing the Pentagon or the military industrial complex for their waste and things, they accuse you of not supporting the military, which is really two different things, right? I mean, as a business executive, if you're going to criticize waste, that doesn't mean you're not for the business. It means you are for the business. You want it to run better and smoother and be more efficient, and we want our country to be stronger. So criticizing the waste, getting rid of the fraud, making sure our goals are in line with what we're doing is an important part of being, running our country better and making sure that our goals overseas and locally are aligned.
Yeah, it's really it's a pro-security argument. It's saying if we're going to have this institution that protects us, let's make it run as effectively as possible. And so, yeah, that argument that, taking money away from the Pentagon makes us less safe assumes that the money that's being spent now is making us safer, and much of it is not.
Exactly. And it's assumed it's not going in the wrong hands. It's assumed that we're competent at managing the money, which it's proven on multiple occasions that we're not. There's a lot of issues. Have you seen any of the underground facilities that they're creating all over the country? I know that's kind of in the whole conspiracy world, but there's actually really are films showing that a lot of money is going towards building underground bases in the United States and elsewhere. Are you aware of any of that stuff?
Other than some of the existing ones, like the ones for controlling the nuclear forces, and there's underground storage of all kinds of things. But yeah, I'm not familiar with major bases being built underground.
Well, I know there's a major base in Denver under the airport where there's videos that are out there showing the base under the airport. And I was curious as to how much money is going into some of those things, if you knew anything about that.
No, I don't know if it's broken out. I mean, there is a lot reported about the Pentagon. Some of it is kind of hard to dig up. It's in these obscure documents, which aren't very well explained. So it could be that case where it's just sort of buried in a haystack, or it could be that they're not actually reporting that level of detail.
Well, because so much of it is confidential, right? I mean, when they can make almost everything confidential, it's very hard for us to really know what's going on.
Yes. I mean, there's sort of two layers you have to penetrate. One is secrecy, just stamping everything top secret. And then also certain things that the companies do. For example, I was trying to find out where some of the small arms in some of these conflicts were coming from, which companies. And the State Department would say, well, that's confidential business information. Because somehow if somebody knows that company A is selling rifles to this conflict, then another company will somehow outbid them and it'll hurt their business interests. It's absurd, given that there's lives at stake.
Exactly.
Controlling these things, that information should be public. But this confidential argument has been around for as long as I've been trying to research this stuff.
Well, and confidentiality is important. Don't get us, if you're going to be doing a strategic mission, you can't tell everybody what you're doing. But at the same point, when everything's used to be confidential, then it's ridiculous.
Yeah, it can become a kind of an umbrella under which a lot of fraud occurs.
Fraud, incompetence, whatever, hiding, whatever. So how do you think that the United States is at home and abroad, and maybe we can, separate into two different conversations here, is being affected by just this mass military industrial complex?
Well, I think at home, it's foreclosing a lot of other options. So investments, Pentagon spending creates fewer jobs than pretty much anything else you can do. 25% less than a tax cut, about 1.5 times less than infrastructure or environmental investments, 2 times as many teachers for the same money. So, we're losing employment and we're losing the ability to solve a lot of domestic problems because, the government only has so much money to invest. I mean, if we wanted to raise taxes and run a huger deficit, there'd be more money, but people don't want to do that. So we have a set amount of money or it's growing at a set rate. And therefore, there's a lot of important public investments that aren't happening. Not to mention we have, unbelievable rates of poverty and underemployment for being the wealthiest country in the world. So
you said cutting taxes creates 2.5 times as many jobs as spending the money on the military industrial complex?
25% more. So not
25% more. Okay.
But an increment more. And then overseas, in addition to the cost to the troops who are at risk, sometimes in wars like Iraq, which should never have been fought, the United States' reputation in the world is tied very closely to our military presence. And so I think that does not speak well for us. We spend 12 times as much on the Pentagon as we spend on the State Department. And also, Robert Gates, when he was Secretary of Defense, pointed out it takes more people to run one aircraft carrier strike force than there are trained diplomats in the entire U.S. State Department. Yeah. So it means when there's a problem, our people available to consider diplomatic solutions, who know history, culture, language of the region that we're concerned with. There's few of them to generate.
We're just doing a good job at it, right? I mean, because when we went into Iraq, we did an amazing job going in militarily and taking them down. And then we did an awful job afterwards diplomatically and running what needs to be done and setting things up. And like you said, maybe the diplomatic efforts before war even occurs. We just don't do a good job at the softer aspects of running the country. But we're really good at taking people out with missiles.
That's right. And somehow there's this idea that if you don't use force, you're not doing anything. And in fact, people who call for reducing foreign military commitments are accused of being isolationists sometimes. But that doesn't account for the fact that you can have economic relations, you can have diplomatic relations, you can have cultural exchange. There's all kinds of ways to engage the world that aren't military, but they're sort of almost not counted in the equation in some of the debate that we have about what our foreign policy should be. And then the disasters like Iraq, there seems to be a very short memory, at least in the press, of just how dysfunctional that was.
How bad we were at it. I mean, we were just so awful at it. I mean, we were great at going in there and taking them out, and then we were just completely incompetent at the other parts of it.
Yeah. It's sort of a conventional war where you're taking out tanks and aircraft and bases. U.S. military is the best in the world at that. But if you've got a guerrilla insurgency that you've helped to create, fighting that with high-tech weapons is not necessarily that effective. And then the Pentagon was in charge for a long time of the rebuilding effort. So they're used to, letting companies run rampant with cost overruns and such. And also they just didn't have the expertise to oversee, is they're rebuilding the electrical grid. Are they doing it properly? So the companies, were very free they didn't have people overseeing them who knew a lot about the business they're engaged in. Or
the culture of the place that we're in, right? I mean, we didn't have the people who understood the local cultures to make sure that what we do was going to be accepted. And, obviously, if you're going to make a change, that the change that you make is going to be hard to be accepted. But we didn't need to make change.